The Reverend Lacey was in his study, wrestling with Sunday's sermon, and didn't hear the bustle of arrival late the following evening. In general, as long as matters progressed with a degree of order and custom, he took little notice of his surroundings, and when his study door was opened without so much as an alerting knock, he looked up from his paper with an air of startled annoyance. Livia had pushed just her head round the door so as to minimize the disturbance. "Shall I go away again?" she asked with a smile. "Good God, come in, Livia," her father demanded, pushing his spectacles up onto his broad white forehead. "Why didn't you tell me you were coming, child?" "Well, I didn't know I was until I did," Livia said, coming fully into the familiar room, closing the door at her back. "What's that supposed to mean?" her father demanded. "I'm always telling you to be precise in your speech. The English language is the richest in the world, and you do it no honor by employing such ridiculous, nonsensical phrasing." But despite the irascibility of his tone, his faded grey eyes were filled with pleasure as he came around the desk and opened his arms to her. He held her in a tight embrace for a moment or two, then stood back and put his hands on her shoulders. "Let me look at you." The youthful brightness of his eyes might have faded somewhat, but the sharpness of observation and intellect was far from blunted. "Is something amiss, Livia?" She shook her head. "No, quite the opposite. But I don't want to disturb you in the middle of working. I'll go and get some supper, and come back in an hour. It's been a long day." "You came from London in one day?" "In a post-chaise," she said. "We changed horses every hour so we were able to make good speed." Her father frowned. "That must have cost a pretty penny." Livia made no mention of the fact that it was not her own purse that had funded the expensive travel. Instead, she responded calmly, "Probably no more than putting up for the night in a coaching inn, and I'd have had to bring a maid with me if I did that, so I think it was a cost-effective luxury on the whole." He seemed to consider this. Then he shook his head. "Well, maybe. Go and get some food inside you, and come back in an hour to tell me what brings you home in such impetuous haste." Livia left him, and made her way to the kitchen, where Martha, the village woman who had stepped in as housekeeper when Livia went up to London, was stirring a pot of soup on the range. "There's cabbage and potato soup, Lady Liv, and a morsel of chicken pie left from the Reverend's dinner," she said. "Will that do? Or shall I boil you a couple of eggs?" "No, soup and pie will be perfect, thank you, Martha." Livia pulled out a chair and sat at the long kitchen table. "How's he been?" "Well enough." Martha ladled soup into an earthenware bowl and set it before Livia. "His joints bother him when there's damp in the air, and he will fuss if I light a fire in his study. Not until—" "October 20th, Livia chimed in with a chuckle. I never understood what was so magical about that date. No fires after March 30th, and none before October 20th. Only 6 inches of snow on the ground could change his mind." She dipped her spoon in her soup, "But otherwise he's keeping well." "Oh, aye." Martha sliced a loaf of barley bread and passed Livia a piece on the end of the knife. "He's so busy with his books and papers, he barely gets to bed of a night, but he's well enough in himself." She went into the pantry to fetch the pie, talking as she did so. "He misses you, though, Lady Liv. Not that he'd ever say as much." She backed out of the pantry with a pie dish that she set on the table. "Will I pop this in the bread oven for a minute or two, just to warm it through?" Livia nodded, her mouth full of bread and soup. It seemed strange to be sitting here in her father's kitchen, eating this good, homely food, chatting with Martha just like her life before Cavendish Square, before her head was turned by duchesses and rout balls, card parties and the opera. Had these last months changed her in any fundamental way?